For most of his life, Ethan Carter believed loyalty mattered more than recognition. That belief started the day he turned 16, and his father handed him a company uniform instead of a birthday gift. "Family earns their place," Richard Carter had said firmly. "Nobody gets special treatment here." Ethan remembered feeling proud hearing those words. Back then, Carter Logistics was a struggling regional shipping company operating out of a tiny warehouse with leaking ceilings and broken forklifts. Richard worked endlessly, and Ethan admired him more than anyone in the world, so Ethan gave everything to the business. While his friends went to college parties, Ethan spent nights organizing freight schedules. When employees quit during difficult years, Ethan drove delivery trucks himself. He missed vacations, birthdays, even relationships because his father always said sacrifice was temporary. "One day this company will be yours," Richard often promised. Those words became Ethan's entire future. 15 years later, Carter Logistics had transformed into a billion-dollar corporation with offices across the country. Employees respected Ethan because he treated warehouse workers and executives the same way. He knew the names of janitors, truck drivers, receptionists, and interns. Unlike Richard, Ethan listened before speaking. Most people inside the company assumed Ethan would officially become CEO during the company's 30th anniversary celebration. Including Ethan himself, the ballroom glittered with wealth that night. Crystal chandeliers reflected against gold decorations, while investors and executives laughed over expensive champagne. Massive screens displayed the Carter Logistics logo beside photos of Richard through the years. Ethan adjusted his tie nervously while standing near the stage. His assistant Maria smiled warmly. "You ready for the big speech, boss?" Ethan laughed softly. "Not boss yet, but everyone knows," she replied confidently. "You built half this company." Before Ethan could answer, applause suddenly erupted across the ballroom. Richard Carter stepped onto the stage. Even at 68, Richard carried himself like a king. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his expensive tuxedo flawless. Beside him stood Ethan's younger brother Kyle, looking uncomfortable in a designer suit while scrolling through his phone. Ethan frowned slightly. Kyle had never cared about the company. He spent most of his life chasing internet fame, luxury vacations, and nightclub attention. Richard constantly criticized Ethan for being too serious, yet somehow ignored every irresponsible thing Kyle did. Richard lifted his glass proudly. "Tonight," he announced, "marks 30 incredible years of Carter Logistics." The crowd applauded. Richard continued speaking about success, legacy, and family values. Ethan felt his chest tighten with nervous excitement. Years of sacrifice had finally led to this moment. Then Richard smiled toward Kyle, and because legacy matters, he said loudly, "I'm proud to announce the future CEO of Carter Logistics." Ethan straightened instinctively. "My son, Kyle Carter." The room exploded with applause. Ethan stopped breathing. For several seconds, he genuinely thought he had misunderstood the words. Kyle looked shocked himself. Richard pulled him forward proudly while cameras flashed across the ballroom. Investors clapped politely. Employees exchanged confused glances. Ethan felt hundreds of eyes slowly turning toward him. His face burned with humiliation. Richard noticed him standing frozen near the stage. Then came the sentence Ethan would never forget. "Ethan works hard," Richard said casually into the microphone, "but leadership requires instinct. My oldest son is reliable, just not visionary enough for this level." Several people looked away awkwardly. The humiliation hit harder than a slap. 15 years. 15 years of loyalty reduced to a public insult. Ethan forced himself to smile weakly while applause continued around him. Inside, something painful cracked apart. Kyle finally approached him quietly after the announcement. "Ethan, I swear I didn't know. It's fine." Ethan interrupted calmly. But it wasn't fine, not even close. As the celebration continued, Ethan walked alone through the executive hallway behind the ballroom. His hands trembled uncontrollably. He felt foolish for ever believing loyalty guaranteed respect. Then his phone buzzed. A message from an anonymous number appeared. "Check the Western Europe account files. Your father is hiding something." Attached was a screenshot of suspicious financial transfers totaling millions of dollars. Ethan stared at the screen. His heartbreak instantly turned into something colder, suspicion. And for the first time in his life, Ethan wondered if losing the company might have saved him from something far worse. 3 days after the anniversary banquet, Ethan still couldn't escape the humiliation. News articles flooded business websites praising Kyle Carter as the young visionary, chosen to lead Carter Logistics into the future. Social media clips showed Richard proudly hugging his younger son, while Ethan stood blurred in the background like an unimportant employee. Every headline felt like a knife twisting deeper. Ethan stayed inside his apartment most of the week, ignoring phone calls from reporters and former co-workers. He barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard his father's voice again, not visionary enough. The words haunted him. His mother called constantly. "Your father didn't mean to embarrass you," she insisted during one painful conversation. "He just thinks Kyle has fresh ideas," Ethan laughed bitterly. "Kyle doesn't even know how the shipping software works. Please don't start fighting with your brother." "I'm not fighting," Ethan replied quietly. "I'm finally seeing things clearly." After hanging up, Ethan opened the anonymous message again. "Check the Western Europe account files." At first, he wanted to ignore it. He told himself he was simply angry and looking for reasons to hate his father. But something kept bothering him. Over the past year, Ethan had noticed strange inconsistencies in company reports. Missing payments, inflated overseas expenses, contracts approved without proper documentation. Whenever he questioned the accounting department, executives became defensive unusually fast. Back then, Richard always dismissed Ethan's concerns. "You worry too much," his father would say. Now Ethan wondered why. Unable to let it go, he opened his laptop and accessed archived financial records he still legally possessed from his executive role. Hours passed as he cross-checked invoices, transfers, and offshore accounts. The deeper he looked, the worse it became. Millions of dollars had quietly disappeared through shell companies connected to Carter Logistics. Fake consulting firms billed enormous fees for services that didn't exist. International accounts moved money through complicated layers designed to hide the original source. Ethan's stomach tightened. This wasn't sloppy accounting, it was fraud. His phone rang suddenly. "Maria." "Ethan," she whispered nervously the moment he answered. "I shouldn't even be calling." "What's wrong?" "There are people shredding documents tonight." Ethan sat upright instantly. "What documents?" "I don't know exactly, but legal teams have been inside the executive floor since yesterday." "Your father looks terrified." Fear crept through Ethan's chest. "Maria, has anyone mentioned an investigation?" Silence. Then quietly, "I think someone contacted federal regulators." After the call ended, Ethan stared at the growing pile of evidence on his screen. His head pounded. This was his family. No matter how badly Richard treated him, turning him in would destroy everything the Carters built over 3 decades. Employees could lose jobs. His mother's life would collapse. Kyle would become public humiliation overnight. But another thought disturbed him even more. How many innocent people were already being hurt? Investors trusted Carter Logistics with millions. Employees devoted their lives to the company exactly the way Ethan once had. If the fraud continued, pensions, savings, and livelihoods could vanish overnight. Around midnight, Ethan received another anonymous email. This time it contained internal memos proving Richard personally approved fake overseas transactions. At the bottom was one sentence: "You were never supposed to find this." Ethan leaned back slowly, emotionally exhausted. For years he defended his father's harshness because he believed Richard was honest underneath it all. Strict, demanding, cold sometimes, but honest. Now even that belief was collapsing. By sunrise, Ethan had organized every suspicious document into one encrypted digital file. Bank transfers, fake contracts, executive approvals, offshore account records. Enough evidence to trigger a federal investigation. His finger hovered over the anonymous SEC reporting portal for nearly a full minute. Once he submitted the file, there would be no undoing it. His family would never forgive him, but deep down, Ethan realized something painful. His father had already destroyed the family the moment he chose greed over integrity. With shaking hands, Ethan uploaded the file. Then he sat silently in the darkness as the confirmation message appeared on the screen. Report successfully submitted, and somewhere across the city, the fall of Carter Logistics had already begun. The first sign of disaster came 6 weeks later. At exactly 8:13 on a Monday morning, federal agents walked into Carter Logistics headquarters carrying sealed subpoenas. By noon, financial news channels were broadcasting live outside the building, while terrified employees whispered through crowded hallways. Ethan watched everything unfold from the television in his apartment. Sources confirm the SEC has launched a formal investigation into Carter Logistics regarding allegations of financial misconduct and hidden offshore accounts. He muted the screen, his stomach twisting painfully. This wasn't how he imagined revenge would feel. There was no satisfaction, no victory, only grief. His phone exploded with messages from former coworkers. Did you know about this? What's happening? Richard says someone betrayed the family. Then came the call Ethan dreaded most. His father. Ethan answered after the third ring. How dare you? Richard's voice thundered instantly. Do you understand what you've done? Ethan closed his eyes. What I've done, or what you've been doing for years. You ungrateful little traitor. The insult hurt more than Ethan expected. I gave my life to that company. Ethan replied quietly, and you know it. You destroyed it because your feelings got hurt. No, Ethan snapped for the first time. You destroyed it the second you started stealing from investors. Silence filled the line briefly. Then Richard spoke coldly. You think you're morally superior, that business survives on honesty alone. You're naive. Ethan's chest tightened. For years he had admired this man. Now he barely recognized him. You taught me integrity mattered, Ethan whispered. Richard laughed bitterly. Integrity doesn't build empires, power does. The call ended. Ethan stared at the phone for several seconds, emotionally numb. 2 days later, the scandal worsened. Internal company emails leaked publicly. Reporters uncovered evidence of fake overseas contracts worth nearly $80 million. Investors immediately pulled funding, while Carter Logistics stock collapsed almost overnight, and Kyle completely fell apart. Clips surfaced online showing the new CEO screaming at reporters outside headquarters. I didn't know anything, Kyle shouted desperately while cameras surrounded him. I just signed what they told me to sign. The internet mocked him mercilessly, but watching Kyle break down didn't make Ethan happy either. Because for the first time, Ethan realized his younger brother wasn't the mastermind behind any of this. Kyle was just another person desperate for Richard's approval, exactly like Ethan once was. 3 former executives eventually testified to federal investigators. One of them directly confirmed Ethan had repeatedly warned leadership about suspicious financial activity over the past year. Suddenly, the public narrative shifted. Instead of appearing jealous, Ethan became the executive who tried to stop the corruption before it destroyed the company. Maria visited Ethan one evening carrying a box of personal belongings from his old office. They're cleaning out executive floors, she said softly. Ethan opened the box slowly. Inside sat framed employee photos, awards, and an old company badge from his very first year. At the bottom rested something unexpected. A handwritten note from Kyle. I'm sorry, that was all it said. Ethan stared at the shaky handwriting for a long moment. Later that night, he finally agreed to meet his brother. Kyle arrived looking exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath his eyes, and his expensive clothes no longer looked impressive. For once, he seemed completely human instead of spoiled. I hated you for years, Kyle admitted quietly. Dad always compared me to you. Ethan frowned. What? Kyle laughed weakly. You were the responsible son, the hard-working son, the perfect son. I spent my whole life feeling second place. Ethan sat speechless. All this time, he believed Richard favored Kyle completely, but maybe Richard had damaged both sons differently. I never wanted the company, Kyle confessed, tears filling his eyes. I just wanted him to finally be proud of me. The words hit Ethan hard because they sounded painfully familiar. For the first time since the investigation began, Ethan stopped seeing Kyle as the enemy. And together, both brothers finally understood the real thing that destroyed their family wasn't business. It was their father's need for control. By winter, Carter Logistics officially collapsed. The company that once dominated the shipping industry now existed only through bankruptcy hearings, frozen accounts, and endless news coverage. Federal prosecutors charged Richard Carter with multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, and financial misconduct. Former investors called him a liar. Business magazines labeled him the architect of one of the decade's biggest corporate scandals. Yet none of those headlines hurt Richard as much as walking into court alone. The powerful empire builder who once controlled thousands of employees now avoided eye contact with reporters while cameras flashed around him mercilessly. Ethan watched one of the court appearances online from a small office across town, not the executive tower he once dreamed of leading. This office was simple, quiet, honest. After the collapse of Carter Logistics, several former employees reached out to Ethan asking if he would ever start another company. At first, he refused. The pain from his family's betrayal still felt too fresh, but then Maria said something that changed everything. People didn't trust Carter Logistics. She told him one afternoon, "They trusted you." 3 months later, Ethan opened Horizon Freight Solutions with only 12 employees, many of them warehouse workers and drivers who had once worked under him years earlier. There were no luxury offices, no giant launch party, no magazine interviews, just people working hard together without fear. And strangely, Ethan felt more successful in that tiny office than he ever had inside his father's billion-dollar empire. One snowy evening, Kyle appeared unexpectedly outside Horizon's office. Ethan almost didn't recognize him. The expensive watches, designer suits, and arrogant confidence were gone. Kyle looked thinner now, humble. "Nervous? I know I probably don't deserve this," Kyle said carefully, "but can we talk?" They sat inside Ethan's office long after employees left for the night. Kyle stared at the floor. "Dad hasn't spoken to me in weeks." Ethan remained silent. "He blames me for signing documents without reading them." Kyle laughed bitterly. "Funny, right? The same man who told me to trust him." Pain filled the room quietly. Then Kyle looked up. "I'm sorry, Ethan, for everything. I should have defended you that night." Ethan studied his younger brother carefully. For years he imagined revenge as watching Kyle lose everything. But sitting here now, Ethan saw someone just as emotionally damaged as himself. "You were trying to earn his love," Ethan said softly. Kyle's eyes filled with tears instantly. "Wasn't that all either of us ever did?" A month later, Ethan received an unexpected request from Richard himself. Against his better judgment, Ethan agreed to visit him. The meeting took place in a quiet legal office before another court hearing. Richard looked older than Ethan remembered. Smaller somehow, the confidence that once terrified entire boardrooms had disappeared. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Richard sighed heavily. "I built that company because I was afraid of being poor again," he admitted quietly. "And somewhere along the way I stopped caring who got hurt." Ethan listened silently. Then Richard said the one thing Ethan never expected. "I gave the company to Kyle because you reminded me too much of myself." Ethan frowned in confusion. "You were disciplined, intelligent, better than me in many ways." Richard's voice cracked slightly. "And I hated that." Years of confusion suddenly collided together inside Ethan's mind, all the criticism, all the impossible standards, all the emotional distance. None of it happened because Ethan was weak. It happened because his father saw his own failures reflected in him. For the first time in his life, Ethan no longer needed Richard's approval to feel valuable. And strangely, that realization became the sweetest revenge of all.